สวัสดีครับ I'm Point from ค้นพบ Welcome to part 3 of Man and Conflict. If you haven't, be sure to check out parts 1 and 2. Now, I do apologize for the uploads in part 2 because there was a technical issue and the timing was quite off. So the video was uploaded in a bad timing. Be sure to check especially part 2 out because we laid the foundations of the nature of conflict. And the main argument there is conflict is not about something that is wrong with reality itself. Conflict is a result of the ego mind's projection against reality. In other words, the ego mind, which has a survival need both physically and especially psychologically, right? It needs to survive and protect its psychological sense of self.psychological self-concept. It is as if the ego mind sees reality and judges that it shouldn't be this way, it shouldn't be that way. I want it to be my way, and therefore projects some form of resistance to it. And hereby, this is the root of conflict in that perspective. Okay, so be sure to check out part 2. And also, I didn't have time to go into and talk about what's going on in Ukraine.I'm not an expert in this field, but when I first decided to do these 3 videos, I had in mind I was planning to talk about it a little bit, but I got sucked into the nature of conflict more from an egoic mind's perspective, and I didn't want to get sucked into or sidetracked and talked about international relations or international politics. But if you are interested, I will post a link to a very interesting perspective on what's going on here, and that there is an argument that could be made that actually, if you look at the bigger picture and what has happened over time to lead to this war, to lead to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, to lead to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, then you will see that a very good argument can be made that this is actually more to do with America being at fault, the West in particular, America being at fault, and how NATO, in one sense, led by America, of course, led Ukraine off on the wrong road, and therefore leading it to the conflict that we see today, Russia's invasion. Now, of course, Putin invading a sovereign nation, a sovereign country like Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is clearly the aggressor here. There's no argument there. There's no doubt about it. In that sense, they are obviously the party that needs to take responsibility. They are obviously the party that is to blame here in that sense. But be sure to check out this argument made by Professor John Mearsheimer, which I was meaning to talk about.but didn't have enough time in the last 2 videos. Okay, so let's jump in. Today's topic, how do we quell conflict from within? How do we overcome and master ourselves so that the conflict that starts within us ends inside us and does not spill out and cause more harm than needs to be done.More harm than good, right? Let me continue from the concepts that we laid down in part 2 in last week. So, your sense of self, your self-concept, your sense of identity, your psychological self-image, sense of self, we could call your ego mind. Your ego is identified with or is attached to all these different concepts that it considers to be part of who you feel, think, and believe you are. When the ego is identified with something, it feels a natural sense of ownership over it, and therefore it needs to protect it. The need to protect this self-concept, ironically, is more to do psychologically than even physically, right? Of course, you need to take care of yourself physically in order to survive, but oftentimes we see that conflict is also about the protection of your psychological identity, your psychological self-concept. So notice that. Reality just is. Your ego identifies with different and various aspects of reality, different concepts, ideas, and the list goes on. And sooner or later, right, two egos in this sense is going to clash. Sooner or later, it's going to come into conflict with one another, right? So let's use the help of an example. Notice the last time you felt upset just from hearing somebody else's opinion on something. It could be their opinion and judgment of you. It could be nothing to do with you, but their opinion on politics, on religion, on morals, on ethics, on values, on what you should have for dinner. Small things like that can even be conflict, right? Especially between couples. How you should spend money. Should you spend money on a vacation or should you invest that money elsewhere? Say in the case of a romantic relationship or a family context. Notice the previous time that somebody or something presented just simply an idea that you felt was in contradiction to or did not appeal or agree with your idea, did not subscribe to the way you think. Notice the resistance that you feel there. Notice your disliking of it. For example, even something so small, such as when you're waiting in the queue to pay for your items at the shopping center, the grocery store. And the person in front of you is taking longer than needs be, or maybe somebody cut you in the line. Notice your frustration, anger, or feeling upset. And notice what that is predicated upon. You see the beginning of that momentum of movement of anger and upset and feelings of frustration perhaps that gets you to feel in conflict against something. You're angry at something, right? You're angry at the fact that somebody cut you in the line. Somebody cut you off when driving in the streets. Somebody has in your opinion, a crazy, absurd political position, political viewpoint. Okay, notice those things. Notice how, in one sense, you're disliking of it. Okay? If we categorize, if we, for the sake of simplicity, consider feelings of frustration or anger against the idea or feeling upset, we can call that disliking for now. Let's say. Notice how your disliking, in one sense, is tied to the need for you to hold a position about how things should be right now, how reality should be. In the case of the shopping queue or grocery shopping line, reality in your eyes should be that people should be respectful and not cut each other off in the line. In the case of driving, the traffic should be better in this, and people should not cut each other off in traffic. You have an expectation, a position of how things should be, of how reality should be according to your mind. And something is now in resistance to it, or something is now challenging it. Right? In other words, reality is not the way that you want it to be for you. Even the ideas of ethics, value system, morality. If you think about it, it may seem like, oh no, I'm not selfish. I'm not trying to protect my own self-concept here. I have this value system because it's for the greater good. It's for society. But notice how actually you have a need to protect that idea, that perspective, that position. Notice that. And you dislike it when some other idea, some other culture, some other behavior challenges that. Okay? Notice that first. Notice the nature of why you feel those feelings. In other words, you are currently in resistance to reality exactly as it is. Your mind is in resistance to what you think reality should be. And this is the start of conflict. To you, because you believe the thoughts and justifications in your mind, you feel completely justified and correct to take the position that you want. And it's easy from this place to then make judgments that, you know what, that person who cut my line, I'm gonna really yell at him and shame him. Shame her, yell at her. Or I'm gonna honk back at the guy who cut me off and I'm gonna overtake him at the next opportunity. And notice how when you believe these thoughts of yours, these positions that you take, you feel completely justified to do whatever action next that you deem is necessary to eliminate that which you don't like, to eliminate that threat. Now you begin to see the nature of conflict, right? You're talking to a friend or somebody who you may know, who you happen to discuss on a sensitive political topic about how your country should be, and they hold the opposite position to that of yours. Notice how you dislike that. And notice how your anger or frustration and disliking or feeling upset tries to get you to demonize that person, to make an enemy out of that person. This is the nature of conflict. I think you see where I'm going here. Again, all of this, if you think about it, it is not the problem of reality. It is the problem that the ego does not like reality as it is. The ego has a resistance to reality as it is. The ego, in other words, you think reality should be some other way to suit your needs. And that's the nature of conflict, isn't it, if you think about it? Now, I'm not saying this to be judgmental or to blame anybody. I'm just saying this to explain the nature of what's going on here. And I want you to notice point number 2. Right? So point number 1 again, notice when you feel disliking, upset, frustrated, or angry at something because you think it should be some other way. You're in resistance to what is. Point number 2, notice how you are literally looking outwards and you are giving an external attribution to the cause of your disliking, your frustration, your upsetness. In other words, you're giving an external attribution to the cause of your suffering. What does external attribution mean? Simply put, you are blaming something outside of yourself. You're blaming something out there and labeling it that is the cause of my anger, of my frustration, of my disliking. The guy cut me off in traffic, so it's his fault. What an asshole of a driver. That person is taking so long in the grocery shop queue. How inconsiderate of them. They are the enemy. They are bad. They are selfish. See how you're demonizing them? And you're blaming them for the cause of your experience? which you call disliking, anger, frustration, upset, which we could also call suffering. Now, notice how you blame something else. It leads you to believe that blame and therefore feel justified in taking necessary action, even if it includes verbal responses, aggressive verbal responses, perhaps even some form of physical response. Aggressive physical response, which we could call violence. Right? Notice how your mind starts to feel justified, even just thinking about that. Right? And that is the nature of conflict. And also, as the wise teachers would say, that's the nature of karma. Because the cycle goes on and on. Right? If you take action out of anger, do you think that will lead to more good or bad? That will lead to more harm, or that will lead to a solution? Oftentimes more harm, right? Now, this does not mean to not take action, but action must come from a place of wisdom and understanding. Now, I borrowed this word from Eckhart Tolle. I love the way he describes wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to see the totality of what's going on, the ability to gain perspective and see the bigger picture. You want to take action from a place of wisdom. When you're angry, frustrated, and want revenge, especially revenge, you're not really taking that action from wisdom. You're taking that action from a place of ego. And that is what's going to keep you locked in a chain of perpetual or unending cycle of conflict. Because they're going to strike back, you're going to strike back. They're going to strike back, you're going to strike back. In other words, you're training your mind to feel some sense of always feel some sense of suffering all the time, because you lack the bigger perspective of understanding the nature of reality or the nature of how your mind works. You see what I mean? In one sense, it's quite beautiful to appreciate this, I would say. Once you start to understand it, you start to realize that, wait a minute, actually, when you start to realize what's going on here, you start to question yourself that, wait a minute, when I'm blaming that person for driving irresponsibly and cutting me off in the street, when I'm blaming that person for taking long in the queue, when I'm blaming that person and calling him and labeling him, or calling her, labeling her a stupid person or a selfish person for having a different political opinion and opposing political opinion, when I'm blaming my partner for choosing an expensive place to eat when we need to save money, when I'm blaming my ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, ex-husband, ex-wife for the heartbreak and my misery and my depression. If I really think about it, all those experiences are really coming from within, coming from an erroneous or an incorrect way of assessing the nature of my experience. Isn't it the case that it is my own projection, my own judgments, my own disliking of it, my own justification in believing that I'm right, they are wrong, my own self-righteousness, my own impulsiveness, my own impatience, my own resistance to what I think reality should be like, that is causing me to be reactive. and therefore I'm not mindful anymore. I have lost my mind in that sense. So you begin to see that to truly quell conflict, to truly stop conflict and master thyself, master yourself, is an issue of realizing the nature of your mind and how your mind creates its experience based on judgments, based on your ego, based on the positions that your ego holds. You see what I mean? So once you start to realize that it is not, in one sense, it is not that that person drove rudely and cut me off. That person took long in the queue and is being inconsiderate. Is also my own disliking and judgments of it, and perhaps hatred of it, frustration. That's interesting. So what can I do? Notice that mindfully. Notice your emotions, your feelings, your judgments, and your thoughts mindfully. Just watch and observe. And don't judge yourself for having those emotions, those feelings, those thoughts. And learn to cope with it. Confront it mindfully and learn to accept it. And you will notice that when you accept these emotions in yourself, you are no longer reacting to it. When you're no longer reacting to it, you will notice the nature of how these things are impermanent. The emotions of anger will eventually die down. Upset, anger, frustration, disliking, they will change. And you start to train yourself that you're still okay in the here and now. You're still safe. You can tolerate it. You can cope with it. A little bit longer in the queue isn't going to kill me. A little bit being later, being a little bit behind traffic because some guy cut me off isn't going to be the end of the world. I can cope with these situations. I am always in control of myself. And you learn to be in control of your mind, not be the slave of your mind. And you learn not to fall for the tricks of your mind that tries to get you to be in conflict with everything else. I know this is easier said than done, and I'm by means not a master at this myself, but these are the concepts that we must learn to understand, see in ourselves, and put into practice in order to really end conflict once and for all. So I hope these exercises or these ways of looking at it is helpful to you in some way, shape, or form. And I invite you to practice along with me, because this is not something that you embody or you really come to understand just simply from intellectualization, just simply from thinking about it. You must learn to put it into practice. You must learn to apply it. Again, as long as you are looking outside yourself, looking externally to blame something else, no matter how convincing that may seem like, you will always be in conflict in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's a little bit or a lot, it will still be a little bit of conflict. So the masters who have known about this throughout the ages, throughout time, they have learned to become at peace. They have learned to be at peace with whatever is going on in life, regardless of how reality unfolds. It is not to say that they are boring, dull, or pushovers, or don't take any action. No, they can take action, and they often do. They can take action to prevent unwanted outcomes. They can take action to promote good outcomes. But that action comes from a place of wisdom, comes from a place of self-mastery, not from anger, not from ego, not from labeling and judging the other person as the enemy. And this is the nature of conflict and how to overcome it. Thanks very much for watching. I will see you next time. สวัสดีครับ